lots of other places. So here's recommendation for news, for songs is one of the biggest applications now, for movies. So is it just the same as search? Because you're looking for something and you find it. In some ways, you could say yes, that they all go under the same umbrella, but there are some differences. So one is that search is usually more active. So you type in something or you say something, this is what I'm looking for. And most of the recommendation systems are more passive. It's like, we're going to show you something. You didn't ask for it. You didn't know what you wanted, but we're going to show it to you anyways. And then the other aspect is for many of the search queries, there are definitive correct answers. So if I ask for the capital of France or sports statistics, there's one right answer. And we know what that is, and either the system gets it right or it doesn't. But for recommendations, it's not like that. If I ask for nice songs for a workout, there's no definitive correct answer for that. And also, it's much more personalized. Well, the songs that I like are going to be different than the songs that somebody else likes. So you could say it's an instance of search, but it also has properties that are quite different. So we can try to formalize this and say we have a bunch of items that are for sale or are available, and we have a user, and we want to say there's some function of that user that says we're going to produce the recommendations. Here's what we think you would like. Another way to look at that is there's this huge matrix of millions or billions of users and thousands or millions of items, and you have this very sparse data of you get some feedback from some of the users. So numbers 1 to 5 means maybe they put a star rating on the movies that they watched and liked. Or maybe it's just the fact that they watched it, or the fact that they watched 5 minutes of movies and then stopped. Maybe that's a negative recommendation. But most of the cells in this matrix are empty, because most of the users have not seen most of the movies. And so that makes it difficult to try to fill that in. And to make it very formal, all this says is the users are putting in their ratings for every user and every item, there's a rating. And we're trying to make this model that's parameterized by these parameters to minimize the difference between the rating and the true rating and the recommendation rating. So we want to say, we think you'd give this movie a 5, we think you'd give this movie a 1. And as if that wasn't enough, as if we didn't have this billion by a million matrix with only a few values filled in, it also changes over time. There's context. In certain places, I want this recommendation. In other places, I don't. I think systems are getting better at this. In the early days, context was not one of the things they looked at. And I remember, I would send a baby gift to a friend who just had a baby, and then they start advertising diapers to me. It's like, no, I don't need that. This is the context of a gift. It's not the context of a change in my life. I think systems are getting better at that now. But now you see it's even more sparse, right? So we've got all these users, all these items, all this context changing over time, and barely any data to go on. Okay, so even without that data, we got to build some systems, and what goes into this function F is going to make the recommendation. And it's really 3 things. The most reliable is the metadata you have. So if we're looking at movies, there's the title, there's the genre, there's the director and actors that are in it, and maybe you like movies with a particular actor in it. Maybe you like movies that are action or horror or whatever. And that's just spelled out. So that's there and that's accurate. Then there's the actual data as opposed to the metadata. And say in song recommendations, in the early days, they were only going by the metadata. You like this group, you might like more songs by them. Now the analysis is able to actually look at the content to say, what does this song actually sound like? Not what's the printed words on the record label. And then the third part, the part that Greg Linden put into effect for Amazon, is this idea of collaborative filtering, to say, let's look at users that are like you. So we don't have much data on individual users and items. That huge matrix is mostly sparse, but if we squished the matrix so that similar rows and similar columns were put down into one, now the matrix looks a lot less sparse. So we say, let's group together all the users that are similar in some way, group together the items that are similar in some way. Now we've got enough data. And you can think of that as being similar to the way we used word embeddings in these large language models, right? So if you had an infinite amount of data, you wouldn't need word embeddings, because you could just say, I've seen this word in the context of all these other words, and every sequence of words I've already seen multiple times, so I know what's going on. Similarly, if you had an infinite number of ratings for movies or songs, you wouldn't need to do this kind of generalization. You could just say, I know that this user is going to like this song. But since we don't have that, we have to find some way to come up with these similarities to squish these things together. I guess part of it here is how you deal with context as well. So you want similarities in users and content, but also similarities in what am I doing now? You know, what kinds of recommendations would I appreciate now? Sometimes that's implicit. We think you're in the mood to appreciate this. Sometimes it's explicit, and it's part of the user interface where you can say, make up a playlist, put in 3 songs, and then we'll continue the playlist to figure out how to do that. In order to do that, you have to say, oh, I think here's the purpose of this playlist from the songs you already have, and now I'm going to make recommendations that are like that. Okay, so now we've got this function of the user and the context mapping into making recommendations for items. And we've got this aspect of changing over time. So we have to take that into account. And changing over time, part of that is users' preferences shift. I used to like this kind of music. Now I'm into something new. Or I already bought something, so I don't want it anymore. Or I bought something, but it's consumable, so I'm probably going to want to buy it again. So getting that timing right is important. Figuring out what context you're in, dealing with the noisy and sparse labels. So most of the things you don't have ratings for. Some of the feedback you have is wrong. This cold start problem. So what happens when you get a new user who hasn't made any recommendations at all? And that's really a challenging part, because a user logs onto your system, to Spotify or whatever, and you want them to have a good experience, or you're going to lose them. But the startup experience is the worst experience for them. And so coming up with some user interface to say, how can we identify you? Maybe when you log on, we make you choose your favorite groups, or show you something to get some ratings in there so that you'll have a good experience. And that's also true for new items. And a new song, or new album, or new group appears, and we don't have any ratings on them. We have to figure out how they work as well. And then do all that and come back in 100 milliseconds or so when you're dealing with billions of users and millions of items. Right? So it's not easy. And another way of looking at it is really concentrating on the sequential aspect of, you're showing some impressions, here's some recommendations I make. Maybe the users make some queries and you explicitly feedback to that. Maybe they're listening to songs and making ratings of them. And now you got to do something right now. And then that's going to affect, you make the recommendation, and that's going to affect the future of what they do, what they like and consume and dislike, and what your recommendations you're going to make in the future. And so thinking ahead becomes part of it. Another aspect we deal with is, so I mentioned the cold start problem where you have no information whatsoever on a user. Another aspect is, what about these infrequent users? And so for the very frequent users, they usually tend to have a good experience because they've made lots of recommendations, and system gets to know them, and then they do more. But if you only concentrated on them, then you'd kind of, all the data would be shifted in that direction, right? So if you say, here's a loss function, and we sum over all users and all watches and try to minimize the loss for each of those predictions. If we just did that, then most of these individual things that we're summing come from the frequent users. And so the infrequent users kind of aren't represented in this overall metric. And so I was actually involved with an engineering team that says, well, let's change that. Let's divide by the number of watches of the user, or in other words, let's try to minimize the average loss per user rather than minimize the loss per watch. And when you do that, this chart comes out, and it's a little complicated, but basically what it's meaning is those users on the left that had less than 10 daily engagements with the system, they were helped more. And the users on the right who had more than 10 daily engagements, this change is roughly neutral to them. But that's okay because they were already doing much better. And so this was a way to help those users who were kind of got lost by the system. Okay. So you've all dealt with these recommendations. You've all bought things and listened to songs and watched movies because of these recommendations. And hopefully you've appreciated that. But there's also this questions of when can they be harmful and what can we do about that? So this is now a decade old, but I remember when it came out, it was a big deal. Facebook manipulated hundreds of thousands of users' emotions for science. That sounds bad, right? And I happen to know some of the people that did this, and it doesn't sound quite as bad when you talk to them. So here's what they did. So they were interested in this question of saying, critics were saying, oh, well, Facebook is bad because everybody posts these things of, look at this wonderful thing I did. I went on this great vacation. I'm eating this wonderful meal. And there was this criticism saying, when people see all these positive posts that their friends are doing, maybe they get depressed because they say, my life isn't that wonderful. That's bad. And so what Facebook wanted to do is say, we're going to do an experiment and we're going to siphon off 0.04% of users, one in 2,500, and we're going to make a slight change to the probability of them seeing posts from their friends based on, did those posts have positive or negative words in it? I love this, or I hate this, or whatever. And then measure the impact. And they were able to do that, and they found the opposite, that actually seeing these positive posts from your friends made you feel better, not feel worse, to the extent that they can measure that. And so what does it mean? How do they measure that? Well, they can't really tell if you're depressed or happier, but they can measure the number of words you put into your post. And so the change that this experiment had on people is that over the week that you were in the experiment, you posted on the average one fewer emotional word. So you were one word less depressed or one word happier or whatever, based on what these posts from your teams. And so part of the thing that was really interesting to me is, the headline seems bad. Facebook is manipulating your emotions. The impact seems completely trivial, right? Out of thousands of words that 1 out of 1,000 words that I posted was slightly more positive or slightly more negative. I don't feel like that's really manipulating my emotions. But I guess what this goes to show is in the past, when you did psychological experiments like this, you gathered 30 or 100, mostly college students, and you put them through an experiment. And in order to measure a statistically relevant effect, you had to have a big effect on them. Here, a completely trivial effect on an individual is statistically significant because there were millions and millions of individuals involved. So you could say there definitely was an impact, but the impact was 1 word per 1,000. So I think this is interesting. I think they got overly criticized, but I think it was good that they were criticized because it changed the way Facebook and then sort of everybody in the industry looked at these kinds of experiments. Now, it's been the case for a long time that if I'm here at Stanford and I want to do an experiment that works on people, I got to go through this institutional review board. And there's an ethics board that says, well, let's make sure everything's okay. Companies didn't really have that, right? So Facebook, yes, they had some kind of review board, but it was not nearly the same as what was going on in the university. It was just sort of, they looked at that and so these guys said, yeah, we're going to do this experiment. It's probably going to make people post 1 more positive or negative word per month. Sure, go ahead and do it. Now companies are much more aware of this kind of issue. And maybe it's self-serving and the companies didn't want these kinds of bad-looking headlines, or maybe they really are more aware of their effect on people. So still not quite the same as the type of review that universities get, but the companies are much better and much more aware of these kinds of differences. So I think that was a positive outcome. Then this other question, is optimizing for engagement changing us? So this idea of the thing you're trying to optimize is to get people to click on your recommendations, to listen to 1 more song or watch 1 more video. I remember my sister telling me when her kid was watching a lot of YouTube, she said, I have an idea for your recommendation system. After he's watched 3 or 4 videos, the next recommendation should be, hey, Wade, why don't you do your homework? Or why don't you go outside and play and stop watching YouTube all day long? But we don't normally do that. But there's this question of what should we be optimizing for? Is it the right thing to just get more? What is your effect on people? And this issue that there really is this feedback loop. So the recommendation system makes a recommendation to the user, and that can, of course, change the user's preferences, and that can be a good thing or a bad thing. So I've certainly discovered new groups to listen to whose music I really enjoy, and that wouldn't have happened without the recommendation system. But maybe my preferences are changed in ways that in retrospect, I don't really want. And then that feedback comes back and changes the recommender system. Okay, so let's take a couple minutes, talk with your partner, and try to think about this issue. So first of all, is it okay for a company to do experiments the way that Facebook did? And they did it without having permission from the users. Yeah, when you sign up for Facebook, there's kind of this blanket permission thing. So in some sense, maybe they did give permission. Do you think you really need more permission than that to run those kinds of experiments? Or should you not run the experiments at all? And then what about optimizing for engagement? Should there be limits on that? And if you don't optimize for engagement, what should you optimize for? So one proposal is regret. When you say, I just watched 5 hours of TikTok video, man, I wish I had that time back, but I don't. So talk with your neighbor. Let's see if we can come up with any ideas for how to address these types of issues. Okay. What'd you guys talk about? Who has something to volunteer about what your group said?
Some of the things we were talking about is like obviously like what they're trying to figure for the Facebook study, like what they're trying to figure out could have like a net positive on society, but like if if one part is like negatively affecting one group relative to another, there is some ethical questions. Like everybody does agree to the terms of agreements potentially, right? But at the same point, I guess it's like if one group could be more negatively affected than the other. And I think a lot of questions studies is like, what is the negative impact on that other group? I mean, is it like life or death? Is it mental health? I mean, mental health can be life or death, right? And so now you're playing with something quite severe. But it also, then I wonder, like, in a sense, like, okay, you're kind of like choosing, it's kind of like the train track question of ethics. Like you're kind of choosing who to get, you know what I mean? Like how you're manipulating it. So I guess that's one thing I would think about, is that even though we agree to the terms of the agreements, we're also like playing with something that is quite severe an impact on people's health, right?
Yeah, so I think that's right. I think you should take seriously the impact because they can be severe. And in this case, I don't think it was that severe, but people objected just because they felt manipulated. And I think it was maybe because it was explicitly, it was sort of a scientific experiment, they felt like, well, that's not really fair because that's not really benefiting me. That's just your own curiosity. And it's a little bit weird because what it was a change to the ranking system so that you saw a different post out of all your friends' posts. But they make changes like that all the time, right? So they're always saying, I'm trying to get you a better selection of posts. It's just that they were never explicitly trying to manipulate emotions before. And I think that's what they objected to. But certainly this idea that there can be things that have big effect that are life and death if people get depressed or something. Actually, I just saw something this morning. It was an article on this dating site, Ashley Madison, which was a dating site for married people. And apparently they had very bad security. And so some of their stuff was leaked, and some of the people who were found out ended up killing themselves. And so when you think about if your job is security of your database, take that really seriously, right? Because it does have a life and death impact.
But one thing we talked about was how if some of these experiments were done in like a university setting, there'd be a lot more strict like ethical procedures. Like,
Yeah.
Stuff that do what they want next steps.
Yeah. So I think that's right. And the universities definitely have stricter rules. So they've had these IRB rules for a long time. There's these new ESG rules, the ethical society rules, because the IRB was based just on the individual of saying somebody who's in your experiment, are you going to have a negative impact on them? And now this ethical and societal review board says, well, I want you to do something that may be fine for all the individuals involved, but has an overall bad impact on society. So universities, that's much stricter. Companies, they're kind of on their own. Yeah.
In general, when you ask people, like, do you want an experiment where learning without permission, we're going to say no.
Yeah.
But then on social media or, in like marketing, we're like constantly being exposed to experiments, like A/B testing, the different ads, and like, like companies showing us like maybe different thumbnails to try to get us to purchase something.
Right.
So I feel like there's kind of like a gap between the amount of permission that we say we want to have before a study or experiment is run on us. And like the reality, which is like we are probably maybe not even aware that like an experiment is running on us, or if it is, like sometimes, like to be honest, like I don't care. And I'm like,
yeah,
like me too. The other thing we talked about was like for engagement. Like I worked in e-commerce before, and one of the things, like instead of optimizing for engagement with in terms of like clicks on an item to purchase, you optimize on like the number of like on reducing the number of abandoned carts you have.
Mm-hmm.
So
yeah,
that was something we talked about as like before. They're trying to convert into sales. So you want to reduce like how many times someone like leaves your site as opposed to how many times someone gets lost.
yeah. And I think it was Airbnb that said their goal is to minimize the amount of time you're on the site and maximize the amount of time that you have good experience in the real world. So it is possible to set different goals to maximize. But in terms of the first thing you mentioned, what do you think is the right way to do that? Right. So as you said, there's thousands of A/B experiments going on every day. And most people don't object to that. They objected to this one that they felt was manipulating their emotions. I remember there was a famous case of a user experience designer at Google who quit because he says they're messing with my vision. I designed this layout and I thought it was beautiful. And then they do this experiment to say, here's I said the line should be blue and 3 pixels wide, and they did experiments to do 10 different shades of blue, and should it be 2 pixels or 4 pixels wide? And I just felt they were messing with me, so I didn't want to deal with it. So they quit. And on the one hand, I have some sympathy to say there should be an artistic vision. On the other hand, if there's going to be $1 million more profit, if it's a slightly different shade and slightly wider line, maybe if they really want to stand up for their artistic vision, they should say, okay, I'll donate that to make up for the loss. So I think it's tricky. I think we're always, because these things are measurable, we end up doing them. And I think in the past, we wouldn't do them, right? So if you didn't have any way to interact with your customers, you have an artist, they build something and you say, yeah, that's great, we're going to leave it as it is. But now we have this capability to do these fine tuning and change them and so on. So do you think that's right? Or should we stop doing that? Or
And like companies say for them it's profit. I also like worked in a sense it's during like 2026.
yeah.
And like they did A/B testing your website. And at the time I was like, this is so stupid. We're changing the color of like a banner that says, go to do your census survey.
Yeah.
Like orange to green. But like, even though that was such a like minor change and like users are not like aware that they're being a part of an experiment, like there's like maybe some net positive that is created. People like filling out the survey accurately and like us having accounts on that. So I feel like it's just strange because like I'm a science teacher and like in that field like it would definitely not be okay to run experiments like this. Even with like our older studies where they did run experiments on users without permission, sometimes like there was kind of like it's right because like, these are like they did stuff tweaking. And I'm not necessarily saying like that should be like the justification moving forward, but I think there is like some sort of like a mental gymnastics we do to say whether or not it is or is not okay.
Yeah. Okay. Anybody else? Other comments? Okay. All right. So now I want to talk about this idea called contagion. So we discussed so far how recommendations affect an individual user's behavior, and those are recommendations from the recommendation engine. But it's also the fact that the user actions then affect other users. And we have these ideas of, a video or song or something goes viral. And so the recommendation engine played a role in that it started it off and made some recommendations. But the recommendation system by itself didn't make something viral. It was all the users interacting with it and those affecting the users nearby them, and then that spreading. And some of those are predictable. Some of them are seemingly random, right? So this video goes viral. Here's another one that seems pretty similar, or maybe even better, and nobody watches that, right? I think we don't really understand why that happens to one and not another. So this is an example, this experiment done by Duncan Watts and his colleagues, where they say artificial cultural market. So what do? They set up a music sharing site, and they got new music that nobody had seen before. They found these independent bands who hadn't recorded or released something, and they put that on the site, and they encouraged people to interact with it, to like the music they liked and rank them, and then ran that. And they repeated it multiple times with multiple different cohorts of users. And they found that there were a few songs that did well across the board, and there were a few songs that were really lousy and did poorly across the board. But that there was huge variation, and that the best songs in one group of people would be different than the ones in another. And so their conclusion is that the first couple rankings just make a big difference. Right, so somebody comes in, this, I mentioned this cold start problem. We don't have any rankings. You play this song to 3 people and they all say it's great. And now it's likely to become a hit. But if you played it to 3 different people and they said, no, I don't like it so much, then it's likely to be ignored. So they felt that there was a lot of random variation going on. And here's a kind of more technical analysis. And I think they kind of break it down in terms of local and global contagion and viral and non-viral, right? So we kind of understand this aspect of viral that it really takes off and spreads, but there's other contagions that aren't spreading that widely, but they're just making smaller differences. And then local, they mean just the people in your network who are near you are affected versus global, where it spreads out throughout. And so if you're interested, you can look at that paper or just look up this topic in general. And they break it down in terms of there's this social network of who's connected to who in the network, who your friends are. And then there's the activity network of who's making recommendations and likes and dislikes. And you put those together to be able to analyze the flow through these networks. And then, so Duncan Watson's colleague says different songs become popular or not seemingly at random, and it's really hard to make recommendations, right? And so people get it wrong all the time. 3 days before the crash, the famous economist says stocks are at a permanently high plateau. Executive Daryl Zanuck, movie executive, says television won't last. This poor guy at Decca Records says guitar music is on the way out in 1962. And some publisher passed on the Harry Potter series because he said kids just don't like witches and wizards anymore, right? So we get it wrong. There's another quote from some movie executive that says nobody knows nothing. And I think that's true. And, there's lots of examples of million-dollar budget, multi-million-dollar budget movies that fail and small independent ones that succeed. And we just don't know ahead of time. So that's why it's hard. And here's one more. Stupid how we got that little bar up at the top, huh? But this is a model of moral contagion, talking about the design and the spread of moralized content. So looking at people's psychological values. And so now we're getting into something that seems more interesting and more important than just, is this song going to be a hit or not? And so here's a graph of interactions. So these are messages with the moral or emotional language. Immigration is terrible and wrong, or it's right and it helps build the country and so on. And then they broke it up by people's mean political leanings and showed that the interactions are mostly localized within a group, and then small amount of kind of going back and forth. And so part of the conclusion here is people saying, well, everyone's getting manipulated by these political content online. I think one way of looking at this is maybe they're not getting manipulated that much. Maybe very few people are actually changing their views, but maybe their views are getting reinforced, because it's not that they're seeing a lot of content that's differing from what they have. It's like they're within an in-group and they're seeing content that supports what they already feel. Okay. So for years, we've been talking about what a better recommendation system would be. Here's a good paper talking about deep learning of music recommendation systems. And that's has made a really big difference in the last few years, right? So we said at the start, we've got the metadata, we've got the collaborative filtering of what people like you did, and then we've got the actual content. And 5 years ago, you couldn't do much with the actual content of music because nobody knew how to analyze it. It was just these bits. But now we're really starting to be able to understand that through deep learning and actually understand, what does this song represent? What is the beat of this song like? What is the timbre of the and different instruments that are in it and so on? And so that's all new due to these deep learning be able to represent that. So take a little time and talk to your neighbors again and say, what do you think we could do better in the future? What are the negative effects of the systems we have now? How can we build a better recommendation systems for all of us? How do you think these large language models and these other deep learning type approaches, so not just language, but sound and multimedia as well? And how should the interactions with recommendation systems work? Is the way we have it now, is that the right way to do it? Or can there be a better way? So talk about that with your neighbors.
So if you're on Spotify and working for the genre.
Yeah.
Yeah. I do wonder often, and then I had the cushion like the label for actually I would look at something. She's like big musician. Really don't really ever get something that or I can't explain it otherwise. Probably.
Okay. So who's designed the recommendation system of the future? Or who just has some idea or thoughts?
Users do have a higher level of agency and autonomy over like what they want to see, what they expect to see.
Yeah.
Which is different from like the previous era where you are just abiding by the rules that are already set forth by a smaller group of people.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm just wondering, like, in a way, like how much objections, how much like non-localized preference to users actually want to see. Like, for example, researchers, tech companies are like, people in this environment are talking a lot about like this localized preference leading to polarization and problems like this. But at the same time, maybe in a larger like landscape of users, people probably just prefer to see like more content that's similar to their own stuff.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, anybody else? So I definitely like this idea of having a higher level of communication, and the chatbot is maybe a good way to do that, because you can say anything about here's what I prefer. I think some of that you can do without a chatbot, but by having more buttons and so on. So, listening to songs, be different genres, and you can press on one of those or say more, go in this direction or that direction, sort of anything that's more than just saying the only thing I can have is scroll down the list and see the next page. I want to feel like I have more control to go in one direction or not. Anybody else? Okay. And so here is a partial answer to that. I thought this was fun. This was a system to recommend wines. And it's really, if you're a programmer, it's really nicely laid out and you can actually play with that. So I thought that might be an interesting final project idea for someone who's into that. And the other thing, at the very start, Dan talked about the magic behind these things, and certainly it feels like there's some magic here. And it's definitely true that expectations have grown. And so here's one thing is just as people are using mobile more than desktop, these searches for near me have grown. And so doing a better job on that's been really important. But let's see. Let's move on from that and say now we're going to go through a couple of revisiting of topics we've seen before. And so this came up this morning. Court rules in favor of photographer who accused painter of ripping off her work. Right? So photographer took this picture and the painter made this painting. And the photographer sued, and in 2022, the photographer lost, and then yesterday or whatever it was, won on appeal. So, we've talked about these ideas of kind of digital copyright and what do LLMs owe to the creators of content. But here it's kind of non-digital, or it's kind of going in the other direction, right? So there was a digital photo that was copied by an analog artist. So what do you think? If you're the judge, how would you rule on that? Should that painter have been allowed to make that painting? Nobody knows? Yeah.
general, it has something to do with like how much creative contribution like the paper is adding, and I think arguably like there's very like it seems like a direct imitation, so there's very little that's like
Yeah.
added. But I recall there was like a copyright case where there was like a pop artist who just took pictures of someone's Instagram and there was like screenshots, and then he cobbled them together, and that was also a case of copyright infringement.
Mhm.
But the case ruled in favor that because he had organized them creatively and selected from like a mass media space, that
Right.
he had offered something of his own like, intellectual creation.
Mhm.
So I think in this case, probably not, but maybe there are cases where it's like very, very close imitation, but not quite.
Yeah. Yeah, so certainly in the copyright law, there's this notion of transformative work, that if you transform something, then that's not definitive, but that is evidence in your favor. And so certainly something like saying, taking these Instagram posts and putting them together, that was transformative because now it's a collection rather than individuals. Anybody else? Okay. So it's just interesting that these things are going to keep on coming up. Here's a collection of posts just talking more about how people deal with these recommendation systems. So this person's saying, can't believe I first saw this magic yesterday. And here's, this post here is sort of getting at both aspects. This person saying, oh, it was algorithmic magic. I went down the rabbit hole. I loved it. And then there's also all these vegan Nazis and gin stems and stuff like that. So the recommendations can both be great and terrible. And that's where we are, seemingly in the state of the art. And this person is backing that up as well. It's magic and 95% not so much. Okay. Carmen's going to lead you through the assignment 4.
Yeah, let's check it out. So today we are releasing the assignment 4, which is the last assignment of this class. And we're going to quickly talk about what that entails, and you can ask any questions that you have. So we want you to basically do a research project on something that you're curious about in terms of what we already spoke about. So there should be some aspect on human-centered AI, and then you can look at one problem area that you're interested in. For example, if you're in engineering, you could look at AI and CAD design tools. If you're in medicine, you could look into medical imaging and AI. When I did my final project, my team and I worked on AI and therapy tools, AI and therapy apps. And what we want you to do is to find a group. That's the first step. Then you go to this form that we have linked in the assignment, and you tell us until the 23rd of this month. So that's in a bit over a week. You tell us who you work with and what topic you're going to be working on. So we need you to give us a short description of what your plan is. And then if we have any changes, any suggestions, we will tell you by the 25th of this month. At the end of this class, you'll have a moment to form groups and to put that in the form. And I'm also happy to assist with finding groups if there's any issues with that. So please reach out if you're having any issues finding a group.
You don't have to find a group right now if you don't want to.
That's right.
But you'll have the opportunity.
Thank you, Peter. Yeah, exactly. You will work with at least one other student, and the groups will be up to 4 students. How do I go back to the presentation? Peter, how do I switch between screens on your computer? Oh, thank you. Perfect. Then once you found a group, you think about a topic that you're curious about, and we want you to run some sort of experiment. For example, you could test different tools that already exist. You could run another Wizard of Oz experiment like you did in the last assignment. You could whiff off of that and do the next step of it. You could build something, you can code something, you can use existing toolkits that make that easier for you. So it's really up to you what you're curious about. We want you to apply the knowledge that you gathered in other classes, what else you're interested in, and really bring it into that domain of human-centered AI. Then once you did that, we want you to find an appropriate medium of output. So you could, all of what you find, you could write it up in an essay, you could make a short video, you could submit a piece of code, you can make a podcast, you can make a click-through dummy, you can give us recordings of interviews you did. So that's really up to you. You have a lot of flexibility here. Make sure you use that flexibility for something that you're actually curious about and actually interested in learning. Then once you did that, we'll have presentations on the last day of class, which is June 4th, I believe. And we want to hear sort of what you studied, what you did, what your goal was, and then how you studied it. And then we want to see what you found and sort of what worked and what didn't work. Do you have any questions so far about assignment number 4? Okay. We collected a couple of ideas here at the bottom of the assignment to jumpstart your thinking. So have a look there if you want. And then a couple more things about Thursday. I'll be running the lecture on Thursday and we'll be doing a design sprint. So it'll be highly interactive. That means you're expected to be on time and we'll be working in groups. There won't be any laptops. You don't have to bring anything. I'll bring all the materials. And then we'll be running a short design sprint where you can design an AI tool for each other, basically, and practice interviewing, practice the design aspect of it. There probably also will be some guests from SAP who work on human-centered AI there. So you can, if you have any questions or you're curious about what they work on in the real world, you're welcome to bring that in too. What else? Any questions so far? Okay, then you have time now to form groups and fill out the form, talk about what you want to work on for the final project. It's all linked in the syllabus. And if you have any questions, you can come and see Peter and I. Thank you.
It looks like it's.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Now I see.
Yeah. I saw that.